If you don't take the job, then I can guarantee somebody else will, and we'll continue to make Pringles. The message was, you can choose to not take accountability for it, but you're not solving any problem. On the other hand, he said, if you're taking the job, you have my commitment that I'll let you make what you want to do to make the product healthier. And that's a lesson I've learned throughout my career, is the roles that you initially think are going to be the least interesting roles often end up being the ones where you learn the most. That process of innovation, whether you talk, nicotine products, reduced harm products, transitioning smokers to products that less harmful for them, or transitioning somebody from a powder detergent to a Tide Pods, it's the same innovation models.
Welcome back to Innovation Impossible. In each episode of this podcast, we dive deep into the world of product innovation, bringing you insightful conversations with industry leaders behind some of the coolest products in fields as diverse as smart devices, crypto, fashion, logistics, pharmaceuticals, and many more. Our guests share their processes, challenges, and triumphs in creating groundbreaking products. From who to hire to the systems they create at enterprise companies, from research methodology to marketing, from innovation frameworks to the challenges they faced and how they overcame them. Whether you're a serial entrepreneur working at an enterprise company on an insights or innovation team, you're a product designer, or you just love product design and innovation, Innovation Impossible offers practical lessons and inspiration to help you navigate your own product development journey. Welcome back to another episode of Innovation Impossible. Today I'm joined by Olivier Houpert, the Chief Innovation and Product Officer at Altria. Olivier has spent over 30 years at the forefront of consumer-driven innovation, shaping products for some of the world's most recognizable brands. From leading the development of game-changing products at Procter Gamble, where he worked on everything from Pringles to home care, to now spearheading a move toward a smoke-free future at Altria. Olivier has built a career on pushing boundaries, testing new ideas, and turning deep consumer insights into successful products. Today, we're diving into the realities of innovation, how to spot game-changing insights, the hardest lessons from product failures, and why balancing incremental improvements with bold bets is the key to long-term success. Olivier, welcome to Innovation Impossible.
Thank you. Great to meet you today.
Thank you so much for joining. And to kick it off, I'd love to hear a little bit about your innovation journey. 30 years at P&G and now Altria. Where did it all start? What kept you in this industry? And what's kind of like a common thread that ties it all together?
Yeah, great question. I mean, if I'm honest, I had not planned it this way. My background is I'm a chemical engineer, and I started my career in the oil industry, working, on designing oil refineries. So I was really far remote from consumer products. But here is the story, and that took me to CPG. I was actually working very early in my career in Rome, Italy. So I'm French, but I worked there very early in my career, working on, as I said, designing oil refineries. And I was young, and I was going out a lot. And outside of work, I ended up, meeting a bunch of people there that I, built relationship with without knowing what they were doing, and they didn't know what I was doing. And after a few weeks of hanging out together, one of them asked me, "So what are you doing?" And I, proudly said I was an engineer working in the oil industry. And I asked them what they were doing, and they said they were working for Procter and Gamble. I'm like, I don't even know what that company is. What you guys do? And they started to list the brands of with which I was evidently familiar. And we had this conversation, and they said, "Hey, you know what? We think you should join P&G." I'm like, "Why?" And they say, "We think you would fit." So I did apply to P&G, not really knowing what the job would be like. And they actually offered me a job in Rome, Italy, which I declined because at the time I had the ambition of going back to France. And so I went back, continued my career in the oil industry for a few more months, at which point, P&G called me in Paris and said, "Hey, you declined our job offer in Rome, but would you like to work with us in Paris?" And I said yes. And that was the beginning of a completely different journey. But um, I must say, consumer products is fascinating. The irony was, as soon as I joined P&G and my ex, university friends were working, for, you know, like I was, the oil industry or nuclear energy. They had like high profile job, and I was just working on soap. And they
Hmm.
were. I don't know if I was earning their respect back then, but the funny thing is, as soon as you work on products that people use every day, you get a lot of interest. So whenever I was going to a dinner party, everybody was like bragging about, "Oh, I work on this huge mega computer there," and I'm like, "No, I'm doing soap." But then everybody, particularly I must say, the ladies, had a lot of interest in how to best use Tide laundry detergent to remove stains from fabric. So surprisingly, I realized how important consumer products were in people's daily lives. And as of that moment, I realized I was going to do my entire career in consumer products.
Yeah, that's a huge difference, no? Because oil, it's more removed. Sure, we all use cars, we all use plastics and everything, but these are products that you use in your day-to-day life.
That's right. And I must say, I took a lot of pride in walking in a store and seeing the products that I have, worked on being on the shelf and people buying them and myself being able to buy the product. So you're right. Yeah, you go refuel your car at the pump and but it's kind of not the same for me. And I enjoyed that. And, I decided then that I would spend the rest of my career in consumer products. And Altria has no different products, but and I'm sure we'll talk about that. It's the same innovation model and the same process.
I'd love to hear about that and the shift from P&G to Altria as well. But while we're on P&G, what were some of the products you worked on? So soap, I heard you worked on Pringles as well.
Yeah, no, you mentioned a few, but I started my career in fabric care, so laundry detergents, and actually the form of detergent I started my career on is less popular nowadays, but it was powder. um, and then that shifted to liquids mostly, and nowadays I would say the most popular form of laundry detergent is the pod, so unitized dose product. So I worked on all of these, and I worked on many aspects of innovation. So product development, formulation, process development, packaging, the whole end-to-end thing. Then after about a decade of working on laundry detergent, I was asked to lead the Pringles product development. And I'll tell you a funny story about that in a minute. And then after that, I had a role in corporate packaging. So I worked on packaging development for the whole fabric and home care categories. So that was fascinating because I'm not a mechanical engineer by training. So I had to learn a lot. And I quote unquote finished my P&G career working on home care products and specifically dish care products. So brands like Dawn and Cascade here in the US, or Fairy in the UK, or Joy in Japan would be some of the most iconic dish care brands. And I must say I've enjoyed every single category at P&G. There's many I have not worked on. P&G has many brands like grooming or baby care. I didn't have the opportunity to work on those brands. Such a big company with lots
Yeah,
of
it's a big
categories and
spectrum.
brands. Yeah, totally. But back to the Pringles thing, because I know you're going to ask me later about that, so I'd
Mhm.
rather anticipate this. But when I was working on fabric care, I loved it. I was like, I really enjoy detergent. I know it sounds odd to say that, but I really enjoyed it. Um, After, as I said, a bit over a decade, my boss calls me and he says, "Oh, I got news for you. You are going to start a new assignment on Pringles." I'm like, "What did I do wrong? I mean, why?" And my reaction was not
Fabric care, Pringles.
right. And
What's the
and
link there?
right, and I would say, it was like it's a much smaller category. It was at the time for P&G. Fabric care was like, call it $20 billion annual sales. Pringles was maybe $1 billion. So it was like a much smaller organization. Clearly not the same priority, but above everything, it was a product category I had little affinity for. Me as a consumer and father of three daughters, I was like, I'm not sure, snack and what people would define as junk food is what I want to spend all my professional time on. I don't want to do this, right? So I told my boss, I'm sorry, I'm not excited. I don't want to do this. And he said, okay, I get it. He said, but I just ask you to do one thing for me. And I said, okay, well, what is it? Hop on a plane, go to Cincinnati, where P&G is headquartered, and I was in Europe back then, and go meet, this gentleman. I won't mention his name, but he was like the inventor of Pringles. Just go talk to him. He would be your boss. Go talk to him, and if you really don't want to do this when you come back, there'll be no issue. So I'm like, okay, that's a no risk trip. Let me jump on the plane, spend a weekend in the US, enjoy, good food, good steaks, and come back and I'll say no. So that I was determined. And then I went there, spent a great day with this gentleman, took me out for dinner. I'm making the long story short. And then halfway through dinner, he said, "So," he says, "I understand you don't want to take this job. Tell me why." So I gave him the whole speech that, this is not a healthy product, makes people fat, that, it's too much salt, too much fat. I don't want to be associated with it. And he said, "Okay, I understand, but I just tell you two things." And I said, "Okay, go go on then." And he said, "Well, if you don't take the job, then I can guarantee somebody else will, and we'll continue to make Pringles." The message was, you can choose to not take accountability for it, but you're not solving any problem. On the
Yeah.
other hand, he said, if you're taking the job, you have my commitment that I'll let you make what you want to do to make the product healthier. I was
Wow.
like, how
That's
do you
good
say?
buy-in. Yeah.
Yeah, like how do you say no to that, right? And so that was the story that took me to Pringles. Evidently, I did it, and I must say, and that's a lesson I've learned throughout my career: is the roles that you initially think are going to be the least interesting roles often end up being the ones where you learn the most. So I learned a ton, and I don't regret it for a minute. And I was able to do everything he promised, made the product better, healthier, reducing fat content and saturated fat in particular. So not turning a, I would say, um, fun and snack into healthy food, but making it a little better is what I
Yeah.
had as ambition, and I did that. So I was really proud.
Yeah, that's great. And I mean, I have an affinity for this Pringles story because I filmed a video a while back on Pringles' innovation process, and it was notoriously hard to find any kind of facts and information about the development. I think they have over 200 flavors, and I'm kind of curious if you can share any stories from the inside, like what that innovation process looks like at Pringles. I think you worked on a rice-based Pringles.
Yeah,
Um,
so I can't speak to Pringles today because as you know, P&G sold that business initially to Kellogg, and I believe now it's in the Mars family. So I really don't know what's happened in the past, call it 10 plus years. However, when I was there, I will say it was a remarkable brand because at the time it was, call it, the only um, potato chip that is not a potato chip. By this I
yeah,
mean
yeah.
right? Potato chips like Lay's from Pepsi Co. It's a potato that you slice and you fry and you put flavors on, salt, and you put in a bag, and people enjoy that. Pringles, very different technology. It's a formulated chip, so it's a dough. You create a dough, which is, I mean, it's massive. It's the way the dough looks when you, at least when I was then, things may have changed. It was, it looked like a highway. It's as long as a stretch of road, as wide a stretch of road, and then it goes into a cutter and a fryer, so it's all in line. And then we were doing at the time, we were producing and packing 200,000 chips a minute. I mean, if
Wow.
I mean it's more than your eye can follow, and they were stacked in a can that was nitrogen filled, meaning the breakthrough was, unlike a bag of call it Frito-Lay chips. The fact that you had them stacked into a can, the cylindrical can, they were stacked and they would not break because actually they would protect each other. You could shake it as hard as you wanted, they would not break. And because it was nitrogen blanketed, you could actually have a shelf life of 2 years or more. And those cans were produced in only two plants around the world, a big plant in the US, a big plant in Belgium, where I was working then. And you could ship them all over the world, and they had a long enough shelf life to allow for the shipping time. So it was a fascinating technology, and innovation was on the dough itself, so how you formulate it. And to your point, when I worked on it, we had a particular variant of Pringles that the number one component was not potato, it was rice. And the reason why we had rice was that rice would absorb less fat versus the potato flakes, and therefore when you fried it in the deep fryer, it would have a lower fat content. So there was still potato. Don't get me wrong; it was still a potato chip, but the number one ingredient was rice, and consumers liked it. It was crispy. You imagine how fried rice can be
Hmm.
crispy, and then we of course had the flavor, but flavors where it's more complicated than just pouring flavor over the chip. You had flavor in the dough, you had flavor on the chip, on both sides of the chip. You may add complex flavors, not the same in the dough versus the chip. So there's a lot of things we were doing to make the product appealing for the intended audience. But it was fascinating, and I've learned so much. This is a rare product that exists in P&G portfolio at the time, where the person also buying the product, generally the female, the woman, the mother in the family would, I mean, I know it's a stereotype and it's not always like this, but she would be the one buying it, but not necessarily the one using it. So it was a very interesting, also from a consumer understanding, like, how do you trigger purchase when the person buying it is not the person using it for the most part? That was an interesting challenge from a product innovation standpoint.
Okay. Yeah, no, that is interesting. And I imagine that rice, so it was that healthier alternative that you did want to develop, less fat content. I'm curious, from like when I was researching the Pringles video, did you ever meet Gene Wolfe? Is he the mustache man from Pringles?
I know who he is, but I've not met him in person. Yeah.
Okay, and moving from FMCG, from your work at Pringles, this shift to tobacco alternatives at Altria, I wonder, was there any like big culture shock or unexpected challenge in changing that industry?
Oh yeah, it's a whole different word. So for your auditors here, I think for me, having worked 30 plus years at P&G, because I stayed there almost 31 years. And again, I've enjoyed every single day. And to this day, I'm still grateful for everything I was able to do in that company. But when the opportunity came my way to, do that radical shift, I had two choices to make. Really, one is I stay longer at P&G and I continue to do more of the same, maybe on a different product category, because there's many that I had not experienced. And that would have been great, I'm sure, but I believe my learning curve was flattening, because it was, doing the same thing time and time again, but on a different product category. Instead, making the bold move of joining Altria. When I say bold move, I had to relocate to the US. Never lived in the US. I traveled a lot, but never lived. Moving to the US in a completely different industry, joining a company, in a leadership role where everybody else have spent their entire career in tobacco, knowing nothing about the science of tobacco and being in charge of product development and innovation was a bit of a jump in the unknown, but it's kind of this, elastic jump, right? You jump and you don't know how deep you're gonna fall, and you know, there's two sides. One, it's very different industry and it's much more regulated, and as such it makes innovation more complicated. So it's an authorization process and it takes years. It's more like
Yeah.
pharma, right?
Yeah,
So
I spoke with someone in the pharma industry. I imagine gathering insights as well is much harder, asking people about their smoking habits and everything. Even that part is regulated.
yeah, totally, just speaking with consumers is complicated. um, and I face unexpected challenges because I never had to worry about this before. But let's say, if you're not a nicotine user, let alone cigarette, if you're not a nicotine user, you're an adult consumer, you have the choice. It's your choice to go and enter the category or not. I cannot even speak to you. I cannot even have a conversation with you about, would you be interested in trying a nicotine, I'm not talking cigarette, but a nicotine I can't even do that. So it's complicated to try and anticipate what consumers want or might want if they ever enter the category when you cannot even talk to them. So it is an interesting challenge, but there are lots of similarities as well with my call it Pringles or P&G life. The innovation model is the same. You identify an underserved consumer. You define the job to be done. You define the problem to be solved. You create a product solution, and then you start all over again. But so that process of innovation, whether you talk nicotine products, reduce harm products, transitioning smokers to products that are less harmful for them, or transitioning somebody from a powder detergent to a Tide Pods, it's the same innovation model. So that's helping.
Right. Yeah, no, that sounds interesting. And I wonder, because you touched on this before, and feel free to not answer this, we can move on. But with the Pringles story, you mentioned the health aspect of it. Um, what was that transition like for you, switching into, say, a tobacco company? And
Yeah, so that's interesting, and that's why I wanted to tell you the Pringle story before, because when I got a phone call um, from a headhunter about the Altria opportunity. First, I didn't know what Altria was, so it's like back in the days P&G. I know what Philip Morris is. I know Marlboro, but I know the brands, but I didn't know the company as
The
a
parent company.
yeah, so I'm like, oh, what is Altria? And then they told me the story. Somehow, one of my former bosses, who was involved in my Pringles move, ended up being a board member at Altria. And I spoke with him. And, I'm going to make that really quick, but he said, okay, let me tell you two things. First one is if you don't take the role, someone else will, and Altria will continue to sell nicotine products. If you take the role, you'll have all the freedom to accelerate the transition to reduce harm products and make this world a better place. I'm like,
Was
yeah.
it the same boss?
Hey, actually, he was the boss of my boss at P&G, so I'm sure he was involved in this conversation. And he's long been retired from P&G, but was not anymore, but was a board member at board of director member at Altria, and he just told me the same story, and I'm like, and things came back in my head, like, yeah, and I will tell you, Daniel, it's now almost 3 years I've been here. I've learned so much in 3 years. I didn't know my brain could absorb so much information in 3 years, and I feel this has been such a refreshing career move, and not 1 second I am regretting having done this. Maybe, if anything, I should have done it earlier, because I just think this idea of continuous learning, challenging yourself, get out of your comfort zone, is so important for everyone who wants to work in R&D or innovation. It's just go explore new horizons.
And I've heard you mention this before as well, that curiosity is one of your driving factors, and it has to be in innovation, no? But I wonder, how do you kind of balance that, say, pushing for something big, groundbreaking innovation, with a more incremental approach? Oftentimes, I imagine, especially in bigger companies, innovation happens incrementally. You're kind of trying to build on what happened before. You can't just rip down the whole system and start from scratch.
Yeah.
So what's your approach to kind of keeping that balance?
Yeah, I mean, so there are different types of innovation. I mean, you call it incremental. I mean, I call it sustaining innovation. So building on existing products, making them better every day, a little bit, touch by touch, is essential. You need to bring news. You need to stay ahead of the curve from an innovation standpoint. So you got to do that. And then there's what I call transformational innovation. So it's call it the same job to be done. You're still solving the same consumer problem, but I would say in a different way. So an example of that, going back to Tide before, if you wash your clothes with powder or liquid or a pod, it's still the same job to be done. You're still washing your clothes, but you do it in a very different way. And then there's the last piece, which is disruptive innovation. So this is really new jobs to be done, solving problems you didn't even know you had. So you need all three. You need all three types of innovations in your innovation portfolio, but you need to have a balance that is, depending on the nature of your industry, and in the case of my industry, more skewed towards sustaining innovation. Maybe 60-70% of your resources are focused on making your current portfolio better. Transformational innovation, maybe 20%, and the rest is disruptive. And I said the rest because you can't disrupt yourself all the time, right? It's hard. The chances of failure are much higher. But if you succeed, it can have, spectacular outcomes.
Yeah. I really like that. So that's sustainable innovation, transformative innovation, and disruptive innovation. Yeah,
That's right.
those,
That's
yeah,
right.
good terms. And I imagine with the smoke-free products at Altria, that's pretty transformational, no? Especially after a century of cigarettes, that's pretty disruptive.
Yes.
And how does that work internally in terms of affecting the other product lines?
We creating products, new products, whether it's oral products or e-cigarettes or heated tobacco products, that will inevitably attract non-users. But we're not designing those products for non-users. We're designing our products for smokers. And as I said, you know, I can't even have any conversation about what non-users might be interested in. So that's not the focus. But we look at what's happening in the market, and even in a strictly regulated market like the US, we do see new consumers entering the nicotine category every year. I mean, I'm talking adult consumers, people who make responsible choices. But just like, an adult may choose to initiate on alcohol, there's a number of people who initiate on nicotine. And frankly, if that's going to happen anyway, then he'd rather be on
Better the
reduced harm
smoke-free
product
alternative.
than cigarettes. Exactly. But
Yeah.
because we have a portfolio of reduced harm products, so smoke-free alternatives, and there's still the majority of our users are using cigarettes, and that what informs me, what tells me is the products we have today to encourage smokers to switch are just not good enough for them. And so we need to continue innovate, because at the end of the day, you can't force people to do things they don't want to do. Consumers vote with their dollars. If they prefer to buy a cigarette, it's because whatever they've tried has not satisfied them. And the science of um, I call it broadly nicotine products and how to deliver that to your body and satisfy. It's very complicated. It's very complicated. It's not as easy as when I was working on Tide detergent. Stain in, stain out. That it's a much more experiential product category where people look for a number of things when they use a nicotine product. Of course, there's the physiological effect of absorbing nicotine and how fast you absorb it and how you absorb it. But it's not just that. There's the experience. There's the when you smoke a cigarette, there's the smoke itself, the heat, how you hold the cigarette in your finger. All of that's part of the experience. And if you want to replace that with a nicotine patch, which some products offer, you may have the nicotine delivery, but you have none of the experience, and that is
Experience,
not
yeah.
sufficient, right, for users. So you need to factor that in. If you really want to transition people, you got to satisfy them.
This episode is brought to you by prelaunch.com, the consumer and product validation platform. Why trust your innovation to market research dinosaurs who still rely on professional panelists to gather insights that you'll probably never use? When you pay your respondents to participate, their only incentive is to get through it fast and get paid. This practice has led to the growth of professional respondents, low-quality responses, and even bots. Instead, on prelaunch.com, your future customers pay you before sharing their insights. Regular users discover your product via ads while browsing the internet, and if they actually want to buy it, they can place a small deposit to reserve it. This confirmation of purchase intent changes everything. Now, instead of straight lining through the answers in order to get paid, they're actually invested in your product development process. Their only goal is to co-create a better product for themselves. Prelaunch.com lets you test everything from pricing to product features, business models, audiences, messaging, positioning, and everything in between. Discover how you can gather bulletproof insights from your ready-to-buy customers on prelaunch.com today. That hits hard. I used to be a smoker and I tried transitioning. I've done nicotine patches, gum, vapes, And yeah, it was part like one of the things I actually enjoyed when I was a smoker was that feeling of taking in the smoke and blowing out the smoke that none of the other things had. And eventually, when I quit, it was just cold turkey. I didn't switch to anything. Um, and yeah, I guess that leaves a lot of room for you to innovate, to find what are those gaps, how do you solve this problem. And I imagine that along the way, there are also a lot of product failures or unexpected learnings. Could you share some of these? Like when you're launching these new products,
Yeah,
what insights have you uncovered that, actually changed the thinking of these smokers?
yeah, absolutely. So, maybe just as a at the general level, a lot of the people I work with or talk to consider failure as a problem, failure as a failure. See what I mean? So, um, and honestly, it's not. Unless so, unless you have spent too many efforts and resources and dollars and time in developing a product that you take all the way to market and fail miserably. Failing is not a problem. What you need to do is fail fast and fail cheap.
Yeah.
Because you can
And
have
not
all
fail again the same way.
correct, learn from that, and build your new learnings into the next iteration. I mean, I'll use here before I answer your question on nicotine, but use the example of P&G. Tide Pod's a huge success now. It's a multi-billion-dollar category for P&G. Back in the days where I worked there, I think I first worked on a unitized dose concept 25 years ago at P&G, and already then P&G had failed like 5 times launching a unitized dose product. So, but you need to learn. The first unitized dose product was a hard pressed tablet that didn't dissolve very well, and it didn't work for the consumer. So, you had to go through a lot of iteration on understanding what caused the product to be rejected, and improve on it until you got to something that really works for them. But even P&G back in the days, we made the mistake of thinking we had it all, run a little bit of research, and then go launch big time, and then fail in the marketplace, and that was very costly. And you know, um, so nicotine products, as I said earlier, we continue to do a lot of attempts to bring new formats, new ways of delivering nicotine to the user. If you think about it, you have ingestion, you have inhalation, transdermal transmission, and some others that I'll let you imagine, but you can deliver nicotine to the body in a million ways. You got to find the one that, or the ones that are going to really satisfy the user. So we fail more often than not, believe me, even though on paper it sounded like, okay, that's great. We're going to reach the brain as quickly as a cigarette. But no, that didn't work. So I can't. It's an endless list of failed attempts, different form factors, trying to really get to that combination of immediacy, efficacy, and enjoyment. We can, you know. So I think the closest you get to is electronic cigarettes, so e-vapor, where you have inhalation but you don't have the combustion, because people get confused. A lot of people, that's one of my biggest challenge, Daniel. People think nicotine is bad. I mean, nicotine per se is not going to cause cancer. What is dangerous in cigarette is the combustion, right? It's the extremely high temperature that those chemicals are exposed to that lead to byproducts that you eventually
Hmm.
inhale and are bad for you. No such thing in what we call oral products, or even e-cigarettes where the temperature is below 300 centigrade. So there's no combustion. It's vapor. And there's in heated tobacco, which is the other form of consuming nicotine. So you heat the tobacco and you extract the nicotine, but you don't burn the tobacco. so you don't create those compounds. So all of these are much healthier alternative than cigarettes.
No, that's good. And I wonder, you talk about failing fast, failing cheap, but with these products, how are you testing them? Because I mean, the innovation might work. Or it does work. You say, this delivers this much nicotine, but then as it's so experiential, you really need to get it out into the market or focus groups. How does that process look like? How are you testing them, and when do you
Yeah.
give up on that product and move on to the next one?
So, we use all the toolbox that CPG companies would use. So, it starts with conceptual research. So you sketch ideas, you test them, online nowadays with digital personas versus real consumers, maybe. But you screen your ideas, like you can eliminate a lot of ideas through concept screening. And then once let's say we have reduced the number of concepts to a few winning ones, then we fast prototype them. And when I say fast prototype, they can be Frankenstein prototype. They don't need to be end products. It's minimum investment, really to try and prove the point, right? So if you want to say do a nasal spray, you don't need to have the perfect spray to go test the idea. If you worry about the call it the size of the spray or the efficacy of the sprayer, you can mock those up, for a test. And even if the prototype costs 100 times the price of the finished product, you're only going to do a few. So, all right, and you make them by hand, so you go fast. And then we do usage tests. So we have it starts with volunteers, employee panels. So we screen those amongst panels that we have, and then we have a facility where we can bring consumers in who are nicotine users and willing to experiment new product. We test that, and eventually we do in-home research. So we place products with a few hundred consumers, and finally we would do test markets, in different places. Sometimes some places are easier than other from a regulatory standpoint, so we do that. But that's how we do it, and it's frankly no different from how I used to work at P&G. So it's this kind of start small, scrappy, test, improve on it, and it's not like a one shot exercise. So we might get feedback. Oh, you spray is too big, you spray is too small, your vapor is too wet, or the droplet size too small. Then we go back to the engineers, change it and go back and restart. So that's how we do it. And it may sound like this could take a lot of time, but we have multiple streams of innovation happening at all the time. So what is in concept phase, another format is already in prototyping phase, and another one is already in consumer testing phase. So we keep replenishing the pipeline with new ideas all the time.
That prototyping story reminded me, the whole Frankensteinness of it reminded me of, I think it was IBM. Back in maybe the 80s, they came up with this voice to text, and they wanted to see if business customers would buy this. Talk to the computer, it writes it down. But they hadn't actually developed the technology, and so they just had a microphone and somebody in the room next door typing what they said, and they wanted to see, is this something people would pay for? Should we develop it?
Absolutely. And it's funny you mentioned that, because that's exactly the approach. And this particular example is one that I have actually used a few years back at P&G, but it's the approach we take is, how do you have people experience what you want them to experience without solving necessarily for the technical challenges that are ahead of you? How do you know that you want to invest? I have an interesting example, if I have time, of this.
Yeah,
At
yeah.
When I was working at P&G, there was this air care category, so air fresheners. Febreze as the brand. So these are the plugins you put in the wall, and they would, release perfume in your room for, a month. But the reality is, because of the way those products are formulated, you tend to have a lot of impact in the first few days. So you really feel like this is wonderful because you evaporate the top notes, and your typically the vaporizer is a mesh technology, is new, so it works. But after a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks of usage, well, what's left in the reservoir is not as, good as what was when it was fresh. The mesh heater is a bit saturated, so you don't have the same performance. And P&G was thinking, well, if I can really deliver a product that delivers that constant level of perfume release throughout the 30 or 60 days, whatever it was, then am I going to transform the consumer experience? And, it's a bit of a chicken and egg because we didn't have the technology. So how do we test it? And it takes a lot of time to invent it. So we thought about doing the following research. It was really smart. We had this panel of consumers who were using, and we gave them like a fresh product. And then a week into the test, the market research agency we work with would go in people's home without
And
them
spray
noticing.
extra.
Well, actually replacing the device with a three-quarter filled one, but with a new juice and a new heater. So mimicking, the juice stays intact and the heater stays intact, plugging it back, but reducing the level so consumers can see, and they did that for like three iterations. So every time people were getting a fresh experience and they saw that the consumer response was spectacular, and they said, oh, now we know that we can solve for this, we'll have a big return on that investment. And then they started to invest the R&D work in creating the right technology. So you can imagine rotating chambers, different heater technology that would keep performance intact, throughout the life of the product. So a lot of innovation's been done, but only after we knew that there was high reward. The bad approach would be invest the money upfront and resources and then find out that people don't want this.
Yeah, that's very important. Understanding that there is a demand. There's a lot of things that you don't even really need to develop that prototype, get it into people's hands. You can test it if there's a need for that at a much earlier stage. Um, and I remember, I filmed another video about Febreze and their innovation story. And one thing that really struck me was initially it was odorless. It just removed the smells, bad smells. And they realized that people weren't using it. That wasn't enough. And it only was when they added the pleasant scent and they made I think the concept became freshening your house, not removing the bad smells, but adding freshness to your house. That's
That's
when
right.
all of a sudden it took off.
Yes, absolutely, it did. So your recollection is correct. Yes, but it's back to what does the consumer really want? I mean, yes, they want bad odors to go, and they don't want them to be just covered up by scent. Bad analogy I'm going to use, but back in the royalty days in France, one of our kings was notoriously known for not taking bath, but just covering it, his body in sand. That's not what people want. They want the
Yeah.
odors to be destroyed, and then they want the scent on top, right? They want, once, like, again, for pursuing that analogy, you want a good shower, and then you want a nice fine fragrance on your body afterwards. That's what people want, not just the shower. They also want so that's how Febreze story was
Yeah.
written.
Okay, and shifting gears now a little bit, looking to the future. I've read that you're leading the push, Altria's push into this AI-driven product development with tools like Altria GPT. What's the biggest way that AI is changing the way you innovate?
Yeah, so I'll be honest with you, it's a journey. there's a lot being said about AI. It's not always easy to turn that into value creation for my organization. However, I would say the most successful uses of AI today have been in driving productivity. So doing things we were already doing, but in a smarter way, in a more automated way, and leveraging Gen AI. So there's a number of examples that we have already done where that we've already executed that help us drive productivity and do more with the resources that we have. So that's good. Where I think the real breakthrough of AI will come in is in our ability to do things that we have not been able to do so far. And that's what we're trying to focus on. So can AI help us solve, problems that we've been trying to work on for decades? For example, we're using AI to try and see if there's a different way of delivering nicotine to the body. Okay, by feeding a
How?
model, well, feeding everything that we know about it. Like you feed everything into the model. Like, okay, this is, and so that's going through literature, reading all the patents that are in the space, putting that all in, and then seeing if it sparks other avenues which we as humans haven't thought about. So we really trying to explore new approaches to innovation by leveraging AI to get to places that we didn't even think about, because whatever human brains are able to create generally is uh, heavily influenced by our own experiences. So we have our own biases. We impose self-imposed limitation without even being aware of this. So there are ways we have not thought about as humans that AI is coming back say, "Have you thought about that?" I'm like, "Yeah, that sounds
These are
silly."
AI ideas. Yeah?
Yeah, I mean, this particular one, I don't even know where it came from, but we use AI for generating new ideas to try and solve the specific problem of delivering nicotine to the human body. How do you do that? Um,
Hmm.
so we do these sort of things. We also using AI now to try and predict um, which flavor of or molecules are gonna delight consumers the most when using e-cigarettes. You flavors are complicated. They're made of tens or hundreds of molecules, and we tend to it's like cooking. We use experience and intuition, but can we be more specific about, oh, it's
Scientific.
right, combination of that molecule with that molecule at this temperature that triggers the consumer
This
delight.
response.
Right. Yeah. It's when the data set becomes so complex you can't make sense of it as a human brain. This is where AI kicks in.
I like that. Yeah, because AI, you hear a lot about it kind of just being this tool to fix everything, but I've found it most powerful at this idea generation stage. And it seems if you have it both understanding the science and the engineering, the innovation side, the patents, and the consumer and what they want, their feedback from past products, and putting those two together and understanding if this innovation generated by AI will match, say, the synthetic persona data. Will they like this? This episode is brought to you by prelaunch.com, the consumer and product validation platform. Why trust your innovation to market research dinosaurs who still rely on professional panelists to gather insights that you'll probably never use? When you pay your respondents to participate, their only incentive is to get through it fast and get paid. This practice has led to the growth of professional respondents, low-quality responses, and even bots. Instead, on prelaunch.com, your future customers pay you before sharing their insights. Regular users discover your product via ads while browsing the internet, and if they actually want to buy it, they can place a small deposit to reserve it. This confirmation of purchase intent changes everything. Now, instead of straight lining through the answers in order to get paid, they're actually invested in your product development process. Their only goal is to co-create a better product for themselves. Prelaunch.com lets you test everything from pricing to product features, business models, audiences, messaging, positioning, and everything in between. Discover how you can gather bulletproof insights from your ready-to-buy customers on Prelaunch.com today. That was amazing. That was really interesting. And to wrap it up, we can do some rapid-fire questions. Is there a belief that you held strongly about innovation 10 years ago that you've since abandoned or moved on or now think something else?
Yeah, maybe not 10 years ago, but several years ago, I had I had this uh, belief that when I was working at P&G, I think we genuinely were the best in our industry, and I felt that the next breakthrough idea could only come from us. And what I've learned is generally the breakthrough ideas that are likely to disrupt our categories will not come from us. And I've shifted my paradigm here on trying to really look for, outside ideas from people who are actively trying to obsolete our industry. If you think, yeah, I mean, and that's really profound because you can keep building your organization, adding smarter and smarter people, but that works really well for sustaining innovation and maybe transformational, same job to be done. But if you want to really disrupt yourself, you're going to have to look at the outside, and that changes completely the culture of R&D and product innovation, because you have to build partnerships with people who come from a very different industry or very different um, mindset to obsolete or really disrupt your own industry. And that is something that I now have understood, and I'm not wasting time asking my own people trying to disrupt ourselves. I mean, that's not working. You can't do it because I think you have something that I would call self-preservation. You're not doing that to yourself. I mean, and so you gotta look outside and partner with the right people, whether it's academia or startups or a completely different industry to push you. And most of these ideas will fail, but there might be one that you want to make sure you don't lose sight of. And then the other learning is linked to that is, well, last thing you want to do once you've identified, let's say, a partner or the idea is, acquire this company or the IP and bring it in house, because you're going to shut down the creativity immediately. So keep it where they are, and maybe help them accelerate their work. And once it's turned into a product and you test it, then you can acquire it or you can insource it. But our culture is a strong antibody to disruption.
Yeah, it's an interesting truism. It's one I've heard the opposite truism, the idea that only disruption only comes from startups and everything. But no, I imagine a lot of disruptive innovation comes from these bigger enterprise brands as well. But it's finding that balance and seeing who to listen to, where to watch. Not everything is going to come from within. And to flip that, ask the opposite question, what's the best piece of advice that you heard early on in your career that you still apply to this day?
Yeah, I would say, I don't know if it's a piece of advice or something I saw people doing, is like never stop asking why. Like never stop asking why, like a kid does. You know how annoying it can be. Uh,
Yeah.
but
I have a 6-year-old. I know how annoying it can be.
yeah, but it's in our nature, I think, to be wanting when we grow older to simplify things and believe we've recognized the pattern, so we know what's happening or what needs to be done. But until you are absolutely certain that you've exhausted all the possible root causes for something you observe, I mean, the human brain is designed to not see or eliminate the abnormalities, the odd data out of 100 data points. There's one outlier. So our brains would like, oh, this is a outlier, something went wrong, ignore it. What I've learned is, why do I have what's happened there? I want to understand what's happened there. And more often than not, you understand that this oddity was just something real, but it happened under very unique set of conditions. You need to understand that. You need to understand that and never stop asking why it's happening until you have the answer to it. So having a curious mind and not accepting approximation as the answer, I think, is what I've learned. Because every time I have done that mistake of ignoring the outlier or not seeing the little signal, it's come back and bite me really hard in the past. So I say that to, maybe younger folks starting their career in innovation, is be curious and get interested in what doesn't fit the norm.
Is there a product launch that you weren't a part of that you would have liked to have been?
You
Looking at it
mean
from a distance, that you weren't a part of, maybe for another brand, maybe within one of the brands you worked on that you weren't a part of, but just looking at it, you're like, ooh, I would have liked to have worked on that innovation.
Oh yeah, I mean, so I wish, just at a high level. I mean, there's so many life-changing innovations that I look at. I'm like, how on earth did they come up with that? Of course, but even just home, at P&G or even Altria, yeah, there are many examples, categories I've never worked in, where I'm like, oh, this is really cool. So like, um, you know, I never personally worked, but I was close to Swiffer as the P&G brand of dry sheets and wet sheets. I mean, that product has completely disrupted floor cleaning. um, People, and I'm like, oh my God, I wish I would have been part of that journey. But it's totally revolutionized how people, like, I don't know about you, but what I live here in the US, and I have a relatively small house, which is not the norm in the US, but I have a small place. I've never had a mop and a bucket. I just use Swiffer to clean my house, which was unthinkable before Swiffer existed. There was no way around it. You had to go through the painful process. So I wish I'd been part of that, and many, many, many more. I wish I could tell to my grandkids one day that, I invented the mobile phone. Yeah, of course. Yeah, that's, and but it's not really looking at it bitterly and say, oh, I've missed that. It's more like, okay, what inspiration can I get from that? And focusing now on my products and my categories, I want to leave the same legacy. I really want to change people's life in a good way.
Yeah. No, and I wasn't belittling you at all. You worked on some amazing products. And that leads actually quite interestingly into the next question. What brands or people in this space do you follow, and would you recommend other people to follow? Going back to this idea of the startups and listening and things like that, but also, these guys, this is a very innovative company. Look at what they're doing.
Oh, there are many, particularly in the AI space, that I think have the potential to transform the way we do our work. I don't want to name any particular company because that would be unfair to the others. But there's a long list of companies, mostly startups, and I think 90% of them will disappear. But because that's the nature of the beast, right? But
Yeah,
but there'll be a few
statistics.
that are going to have the potential to be the next Apple or the next game changer. So I I'm sorry, I'm going to disappoint you. I'd rather not mention the company in respect for all the other ones that I can't mention. But I mean, it's out there every day. I see things that are quite mind blowing. I'm like, even if the product is not yet there, what they're trying to solve for is amazing. Um, and I'm curious by nature, so with the limited time I have, I'm always trying to get inspired by problems people are trying to solve and how they go about it. The last one that inspired me, but it's not a small company, is when I saw this article, and I'm sure it's already obsolete now, from Google scientists, where they they had developed a weather forecast model based on AI that was very different from the weather forecast models that exist. The weather forecast model that exists still today and prevail today are based on first principles. So they input a lot of parameters like distance of the sun, cloud coverage, wind, and you name it, and then they build a model telling it's going to be that temperature, you're going to have so much rain. What Google did is a very different approach. They had sensors deployed all over the planet in different points, like a network of, I don't know the density of that network, but they had sensors where they could read a number of parameters, humidity, wind, or whatever, and then they knew what the real weather was, because after the fact, it's easy to input it into the system. And they built a model based on past observation, based on what are the real-time parameters now and how. So they looked at what were the parameters like 3 days, I'm making it up, before that weather happened. And they built that model and they benchmarked that model versus the supercalculators. And in most cases, they could predict the weather much more accurately than those models using a completely different approach that requires 1% of the computing power of the existing model. I just thought that, oh my God, that's fascinating, right?
Yeah, no, it is. And I'll definitely look into that. That sounds like a really interesting story. And continuing with the last question, what's a book that you'd recommend to innovators or people in this space developing, launching products? What's something that inspired you recently?
It's not recent, but it's probably one of my all-time favorite, The Innovator Dilemma from Christensen. I mean, it's not new, but every time I see a company going down or failing or stepping back, it's generally that issue. Not being able to see, not being wanting to see, not being able to act on what they see. And so the more people are gonna think that way, the more likely the company is gonna be able to thrive and survive the inevitable changes that impact including ours. I mean, I'll say, we and that predates me, so I take no responsibility or credit. But we were late in the e-vapor train. We reacted too late. We thought it would never happen, and when we saw it would happen, we tried to slow it down because it was not margin accretive. It was not good for our business. So why would we want to? I mean, all of these things, they've they're true across all industry all the time. And while we know it, we keep forgetting about it. So that book, if people haven't read it, go read it and practice it. And because it's like holding a mirror to my face every time.
I'll be sure to check it out. I haven't read it, but it's a common story that I've heard a lot. That was amazing, Olivier. That was a really interesting conversation. You've had an amazing innovation journey, and I wish you much more success in the years to come developing these smoke-free products. I'm sure you'll get there. Thank you so much for joining us today. Thank you everyone for listening.
Thank you. And thank you for your very good questions and for helping me remembering some of my past years in innovation. And I hope to see you soon.
Likewise, take care. Bye bye.
Bye bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us today for another Innovation Impossible story. I hope you enjoyed the insights and all the practical advice as much as I did. Please give us a like and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast. We're just starting out, and like innovating, this feels impossible. And head on over to YouTube and let us know if anything resonated with you or if you completely disagreed with anything, and we can spark some healthy debate into the world of innovation and insights. Thanks again to our sponsor, prelaunch.com, our guest for joining, and you for listening today. And see you again in a couple of weeks.